Welcome to the Wisdom Club podcast, where we talk to inspirational business leaders in our community that inspire us to lead a life full of wisdom and build a business as worthy of our wildest dreams. I'm your host, Leo Chen. I'm a tech entrepreneur, real estate advisor, and investor located right here in sunny coastal Orange County, California. And the goal of this podcast is to expand your mind and share what's possible. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wisdom Club podcast, and I have a super awesome guest today, and I've been really excited to talk with this person. He's been a good friend of mine and also a good business referral partner for quite some time now, and we will get into all of that as our history of how we know each other, as well as getting to know him. His name is Dane Wright, and he is by profession, he's a spiritual life coach that helps clients connect to the truth of who they are, and also how they can feel fulfilled and confident and being at peace, which is the most important part, in my opinion, is being at peace, because when you're at peace, you tend to do the best things in life and everything goes well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dane. Hello, Dane.
Hey there, Leo. So good to be here with you today.
Thank you. I know all of my audience really resonate with this topic that we're going to be talking about, which is your expertise. And so I'm eager to get started. But before we do, we want to just kind of get a little bit of background from you about where you grew up. What was your interest early on in life, and kind of just take me back into the days where what you can remember, and then bring us up to date to today, to where you are.
Yeah. So I'm from Laguna Beach, California, and going back, the first thing that I remember is I used to actually be much more quiet and much more passive. And I really didn't grow into my extrovertedness until, I don't know, like midway through high school or something like that. And it was because, like, looking back, I used to be very introspective ever since like day one. I was always observing things and observing my family and like watching how things work. I was so curious about knowing how the world works, how things work in the world, and how people function in the world. And so it seems like the first part of my life, I was like very observant. That was also paired with being a beach bum. I spent a lot of time at the beach. It was like totally, I was down there just an hour ago. Love the beach. I find that it is such a great place to ground your energy and all of that. So I think from a young age, I was always naturally really attracted to the ocean, and surfing, skimming, all the different body surfing. And free diving. I just loved doing everything oriented around the ocean.
Awesome. So you and I originally connected because we both have young dogs, and I think we initially met at the Laguna Beach dog park, which is a super great park. It's probably one of the best I've like ever seen, like anywhere in California. It's very well kept. It's all greeneries all around, trees, hillside, completely sheltered away from traffic or people or houses and things like that. And it's such a huge space that a lot of dogs can get a lot of fun, just being dogs, running around, playing and all that stuff without feeling like they're cramped up with too many, dogs around, not being able to really stretch their legs. And so obviously we struck up a conversation, right away, because you're such a curious guy, as you mentioned, and always asking questions and just connecting with people. But also at the same time, I noticed that you were also not only were you curious, but you also had, a kind of a soft demeanor to you where it's easy to talk to. I know that some people, different people have different pace in their, communicating and talking, and you weren't in a rush. And I think that's what I personally, loved about you and how we connected. And of course, I wanted to find out about, where you grew up, and finding out that you grew up in Laguna Beach. I didn't grow up in Laguna Beach. I wish I had, and kind of jealous in that way. And I think a lot of people are jealous of that they didn't grow up in such a beautiful art town, like Laguna Beach. And as you were talking, it reminded me how much I love the beach. I always loved the beach, but I didn't know why. But there's just so much energy, that you can kind of soak up from the ocean because it's constantly moving. There's always this energy about it, the wind, the breeze, the ocean, the tides coming in and out and hitting the rocks and the sand, and there's just a lot of things happening where I think it get a lot of energy from it. I don't know if that's true for you too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's just like right now the waves are huge, and so it's just like it's almost meditative to just watch. I mean, these like it reminds you of it reminds me of just like how powerful nature is, and I weave a lot of that into my coaching of just reminding people that we're a part of that. So I think that when we can go experience such raw nature and get to like kind of just be in awe of it, it helps ground so much. And also like I mean, I know about the ions too, like all the salt kicks up the ions. And so, they've actually studied it. It's like, it's chemically proven that like, yes, your mood will shift because these positive ions from the salt water.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
I think that's very true. And you mentioned being more introverted, and I'm by nature also introverted. And so when there's so much energy, around that environment, like we just get to recharge, right? We got to find a way to recharge because we don't always get to recharge around other people. And so I think that's what I really resonate with a lot. And so you're a very curious person, and tell us about your career a little bit, on the way to where you are now, because I think that's a super interesting story.
Yeah. So what I do now is actually the second go at my career. My first career was in medical device. I worked as an engineer, mechanical engineer, and I also studied material science. And so, I was like much more in the head, much more in the logic of figuring out how things work. And from a young age, I knew I wanted to make a positive impact in the world. So that's why I chose medical device. To create something that really can benefit people. But after working full time for a while, I realized that sitting in a cubicle was not going to last long, and that's when I started to explore all kinds of different other things. And at one point, I connected back to my high school education, and I was thinking about like what was like one class that I loved the most. And honestly, it stood out so easily. It was a class in social psychology, and it like this light bulb moment went off, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that is so important. And I'd also discovered the world of self-help and personal development for myself, and it was helping so much because growing up, I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of like undiagnosed anxiety, depression, and it was all covered up by my ability to like people please and put on a good face and put on a smile. And I'm sure all you people pleasers out there can relate to that. But in the background, it was like there was so much unsettled inside of me. And so when I connected back to like my own suffering going through that, I knew that something had to shift. I knew that like the education system hadn't changed much since I was there, and what we were teaching young people is like not really how to prepare for life. And so I was very passionate about that. And so I started a mentorship program, and my goal wasn't to make a career out of it really. My goal was just to go back and teach, high school students what I wish that I had known, and wish that I could have like been better at, like self-regulating myself and like finding inner peace and looking at social pressures and our inner habits of like, why do we do the things we do? Because I realize it's just like, it is so important. Like no one gives you a manual on how you work. So it really is up to us to figure it out so that we can have inner peace.
Yeah, I think the educational system is super interesting. We grew up with this system that shows us like, oh, this is how you become a worker. This is how you become like almost like a for lack of better words, almost like a factory worker, but in other industries. And they're
Mhm.
all, you level up by how fast you do something, how hard you work, or something like that. And you do something over and over again, something tedious, like a factory, like you're part of the
Mhm.
factory. And
Yeah.
that's how we're able to produce stuff, earlier on, many, many years ago. But as we started to realize, I'm sure all of us, so at least since the 60s or 70s, that, well, there's a bigger life than just being a factory worker,
Yeah. Yeah.
and everything permeates in terms of, okay, you do this many hours of work, you do this task, and then get married, and you get a home, and like everything's so structured,
Mm.
where if you didn't reflect, you just go follow that path, and it really didn't, there's this person inside of you that never comes out, right? And we want to fit in, and so when everybody else is that way, we want to show that, oh, everything's cool, I'm just like you, no worry, it's just another day, let's just keep going. And
Mhm.
then while on the inside you may have other feelings and passions and things like that that you are wanting to either learn or give, that's outside of this structural system,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And I think we're very fortunate to live in this era where we
Mm.
get to do that,
Yes.
right? If you were
Yes.
born in, say, the 50s or 60s or something like that, you may not have been able to pursue
Mhm.
something like this, right?
Right.
You'd probably have to move to, go to live in India or something like the Beatles did, or
Yeah.
something like that, right? If you had the money, you had the know-how, or
Yeah.
something like that. But I think it's very, very accessible in today's age, which is really great. And so you found your kind of the start of a passion of how you wanted to teach what was so valuable to you, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I at the time I really didn't think I was going to get paid for it. Um, and what happened next was I started teaching kids that I was tutoring. All this like mental health. Well, what it really was I saw them bumping up against like all this test anxiety, all these limiting beliefs of like I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm stupid, I can't read. And I was like, we need to stop cramming all this like math and reading down these kids' throats and instead like talk about these things. So and it really worked. Like it really helped them ease up the tension, and then they started performing better. And so that's when I realized I'm like, wow, there's really something to this. Um, and I started to work with young people full time, just coaching.
Mm.
And while I realized one thing that was like a pivotal moment was that I realized that a lot of young people were open and like wanting to learn about some of this stuff, but that they like a lot of them aren't. Like I think we can all relate. It's like when you're young, like you think you have like all the confidence in the world, like you don't need help, like you're gonna figure it out on your own, right? And so what I realized is like, yes, some of them wanted my help, but a lot of them didn't. And so I started working with an older group, not older, but like 20s, 30s, people in their 40s. And I realized that what I was teaching and coaching on was just a much better fit for that group. It's like you kind of have to stew in your humanity and the friction of life, the sandpaper of life, and until you're ready to kind of like wake up, and want to start looking at some of these things of like, why do I do the things I do, and finding different ways, and yeah, and wanting to seek more peace rather than like crazy aliveness all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own time of being ready, and a
Yeah.
lot of times, like you said, when we were kids, we don't know what's happening. We don't know we actually need help,
Yeah.
right? And we act out. We don't know that there's something wrong, with that. And a lot of kids get into trouble and things like that. It's a age old, dilemma, right? You
Yeah.
know, they do their things, and they don't really know why that is. They don't know when they feel anxiety, they feel pain, they
Yeah.
feel fear. Uh, they can't. It's very difficult for them to identify it, and since they don't know, their first instinct is to hide it,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah.
Hey, I don't know what's going to happen. Somebody finds out that I feel this or that, and turns out everybody feels that way, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's a very very interesting thing to think about. I know, all of us as kids all kind of have that to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And so obviously you were able, as a curious person, you were able to find your way, and now you're helping people do that. And one of the things that you talk about is a spiritual awakening,
Mm.
and one of the things that you trying to make that happen is you make it happen simply. So a spiritual awakening that's made simple. Can you share with us how that works?
Yes. Yeah, it's one of those things that I think that it can be so complex, but at a very, I love to make it very simple for people. Like, I don't believe that you need to like go to India or like go to like, Bali and like go do like all that crazy stuff. Like you can, I think that's a great option too. But I think that awakening can be made very, very simple.
Mhm.
And awakening is basically just a process of observing. Like, one of the first steps is to observe your patterns, right? So like a really simple way to like start an awakening journey, which a lot of people already are, is just kind of bumping up against something frustrating in life, and being like, why is it this way? Like, what's going on here? It's kind of like taking a step back and being curious and being like, why do I keep doing that? Like, if you I don't know, like, say, you go to work and you're like, have this like kind of like anxiety or something, right? And you're like fearful of your boss. It's like, okay, like there's like this friction happening, but it's like, well, why? Right? Like, why is there like this anxiety? What is that about? Right? And when you start to get curious about why it is that you do things and like why life is the way it is, that's basically like a great way to start the awakening journey, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of taking a step back instead of just being in this kind of unconscious unfolding of life, and stepping out of it and looking back at it and thinking, why is it that way? Right?
Yeah.
And so it's really simple, like awakening can be a very simple start. And it can get very complex too later on. But I just think like the first start of it is like very, very simple. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me, like, when we were younger, when I was younger, um, when we would have dreams. We
Hmm.
had dreams. We'd wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, I had this dream about this. It could be, a bad dream. It could be a good dream, or whatever. I remember waking up just like thinking, oh, I had the dream about this and that and the other, but I just think that, oh, it is just what it is. I
Hmm.
didn't stop to say, oh, why did I dream that? Why was it so weird, or why was it fearful? Like, it's all coming, from us. And just like you said, like when you're younger, we don't know to ask. We just like, oh, that, we even don't tell anybody, right?
Hmm.
And but something does cross your mind, like, oh, I dreamt this.
Hmm.
You didn't take the next step of, well, why did I dream this, and is it because something happened here, because something happened,
Hmm.
you're not even making any connections. And
Right.
so I think that's where you're kind of an unawakened, state,
Right.
and so when you start asking questions to something, then you start opening up all kinds of asking questions about everything,
Mm.
right? And
Yeah.
so I think that's the awakening aspects that probably you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's kind of a funny, it's a funny thing, right? It's like when we're kids, we're taught to be adults. It's like, right, as you're growing up, you do have that childlike wonder, you do have that curiosity, you're constantly asking why, right? But you're also asking like adults a lot of times these questions that they don't have answers to. So then they tell you, stop asking these questions just because I said so. Like, just listen, just do it, fall into line, right? So we get this conditioning. Like, a lot of the start of awakening journey is looking at our conditioning of like a lot of these things that cause the friction and frustration and stress and kind of pain in life oftentimes are due to the conditioning that we got when we were younger, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we were told to do something a certain way, or told to think a certain way, or like we were told that we were a certain way, right? And that we weren't another way, right? So all of a sudden, like, we have all this conditioning that's piled on top of us. And like it's just ironic, right? Because now we have to reverse the process, right? It's like we get conditioned to be these adults, to like fall into line, to be good factory workers, to like not bother anybody, right? And then we get to a certain age where all of a sudden, like all of that is so confining to our souls and our spirits that like it causes friction that's meant to awaken. It's causing like pain inside of us, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, however it's manifesting. And that's our cue to like look at it, right? And that's our invitation, I think, like almost from the universe of like, hey, look over here, like pay attention to this is out of alignment with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if we resist the pain, if we numb the pain, it'll just stay the same, right? But when we can take it and look at it and like investigate it and figure out a different way to go about it, then all of a sudden like your whole life can shift and fall back into alignment.
Yeah, especially when it happens over and over again, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there's a saying that the universe will keep giving you lessons to learn until you learn it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of repeating thing. I was just thinking while you were talking, when just like a lot of kids, they ask a lot of questions, and I was asking questions and always just assumed that whatever I asked, there's always an answer somewhere. However, I had somebody tell me that like, hey, you're asking questions that nobody knows the answers to. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there isn't an answer for that, and you just kind of take their word for it.
Yeah.
And then to realize later on, as we experience things and go through stuff, we like, oh, that's the answer to that thing that I was thinking about, whatever, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And like, there is an answer to that, like, that's not true. It's not true that there isn't an answer to that. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like what you said, hey, stop asking questions, somebody's just like, kind of, shut you down on something. And like, we should all just assume that there's an answer to something. We just don't know it yet.
Yes. Right. Right.
And you should keep asking. If one person doesn't know, like, ask the next person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And sit and ponder it for yourself. See if you can like create your own theory,
Right.
Because that's the other thing is like, what I've noticed is that we all have a deeper knowing, that goes beyond education. And there's things that we have the ability to, and that are inside of us to know, but a lot of times that's conditioned out of us too, right?
Right.
It's like when you're kids and you make some statement, they're like, how do you know? Like, you're so young, like I just heard a client say that. And that was like something he's working through. It was like, his parents being like, how do you know? You're so young. Right. And it's like, okay, maybe I don't know. And then you question yourself, and self-doubt, right?
Right.
So, but people do know things. Like, there's a whole world of intuition, where there is a knowing. There is this like sense about things where it's like, I know I should go do this thing, or I know not to talk to that person, or whatever it is, right? But we don't really have words for it. It's just a knowing, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we all have a knowing, but either we talk ourselves out of it, or somebody else talks us out of it, or we think somebody else is telling us to talk ourselves out of it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's a weird human condition, right?
Yes.
I was hiking this morning, and with a couple of friends, and they have dogs, and they had never been on that trail before, and I was guiding them. But as we are coming back, around, they had never been to that part before. But the dogs seemed to know which way to go.
Yeah.
Right. Like their dogs had never been there. My dog has, but their dogs have. And we were just talking about like, well, they have like a compass in their head, and so they just trust it. They're not talking themselves out of anything. They just know. Like, they're just, I know this, I do this. Right. They're not asking questions. They're not, so there, in many ways, we have, a lot to learn about just trusting our own guts and our own instinct. So I think that's very, very true. You have this thing that that you talk about, that the universe isn't punishing you, it's actually trying to awaken you. And the breakdown is the key to the breakthrough. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah. So it's in the same vein of what we're talking about, right? It's that this concept of, sometimes like life is life, right? Like it's going to throw all kinds of stuff at you. And we can relate to whatever it is in different ways, right? One way is that we're like a victim of our lives, right? Like this victim consciousness that we hear about, where it's like, it's not my fault. This shouldn't have happened to me, poor me, right? And it's kind of like this um, relating to like whatever friction there is in life as like this like punishment or like this like thing that you can't overcome, right? It's like it makes you so small and like you can't overcome it, right? And so in that you're kind of trapped spiritually, right? You can't grow, you can't learn because everything bad that happens, you can't see it clearly. You can't like be in that perspective of wanting to grow and wanting to expand. And so we stay small, right? And we all have this, right? It's like a human thing. Like everyone's got some level of victim mindset that shows up at some point in their lives, right? No matter who you are. And so so it's like we like shifting the script, right? It's like these things, these bad things that happen in life aren't meant to like punish you or like God smiting you or like, however you want to relate to it. It's like anywhere where there's friction, there's like an opportunity for growth and learning and expansion, right? And so so when we shift that framework, right, from like, oh, why is this happening to me? Like I shouldn't have, like this shouldn't be my life, and just like in resistance to all like the kind of like friction and suffering, and we actually lean into it, right? We like look at it and we're like, what is this? Like what is going on here? Like why is this showing up in my life? Like, and how did I get here? All of a sudden, like that's the huge opportunity for awakening, right? To see things in a new way so that you can shift, so you can see whatever conditioning is like led you to that place in life and be like, wow, I'm not going to do that again. Like let's learn this lesson so that we can close the books on it and move on through life, right?
Yeah, we get more of what we resist.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So like if I always go back to the dog analogy because we live these things and I think about them all the time. When I have my dog Lucy on a leash, right, she wants to pull it, right, but if I let her be without the resistance, she actually wants to relax. And that's what we do with ourselves, right? We keep pushing against something, and if there's nothing to push against, we actually relax. Right. So so I think that's very true. And on the flip side, instead of focusing on your resistance and things like that, there's one of the things that I talk about with my team is hey, what great things happened to you this week? Because we want to celebrate it. And when we celebrate that, we get more of that. So we get more of what we celebrate.
Yes.
Right. Yes. As opposed to resistant focus. They're like, oh, I got to resist this. I got to, because you can only do one thing at a time. You're resisting or you're celebrating, right? Yes. Like, choose to celebrate.
Yes.
So I think that's a big part, of how the world works, because, the more we push, the more it pushes back.
Yes. Yeah. What we resist persists. That's
right.
An expression, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that do you have an example of something that you experienced where you had some sort of breakdown that led you to a breakthrough?
All the time. Let me think. Yeah, I mean, just all kinds of things, like I think, like, okay, here's one. So growing up, one thing that we get exposed to at some point is like very strong emotions, right? Very strong, like egoic emotions, right? Where there'll be somebody, usually it's like a parent or like a teacher or coach or somebody who like blows up. And it's like this like kind of destructive pattern, right? And when like, as I grew up, like part of like my people pleasing was to realize, wow, like I should never be angry, right? Like I should never do that because that hurts people, right? Like I got hurt by that when I was younger. And so I should never do that, right? And so it was really a really fascinating thing is like, as I went through life, like I couldn't express anger. Like it was like this thing that was always dampened. And like when things would happen, I would just like stay cool as a cucumber, you know, except for like very rare occasions where like something really would have to happen for me to get like actually upset, right? But then what I saw was like, it's not healthy to bottle all that up. And I saw that like a lot of all of that emotion that was bottling up was the anxiety, was the depression. It was all this unexpressed emotion, right? And so yeah, so I basically like I had to have a breakdown of, like going into the depression, going into the anxiety, and like being so frustrated by life, to really have that anger come out and be like, screw this, like I don't want to do this anymore, like this isn't what I want.
Yeah.
And it was like this anger like came pouring out of me, and it felt scary, it felt vulnerable, but ultimately it felt like the truth of what needed to happen. It was like all this like backlog emotion that I had like dampened down, and it's like it had to come out in this explosive way to make me realize like, holy crap, like I need to like let that out more, right? So it was like this it was just like a realization of like, wow, like you can't keep that bottled up forever.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I had a coach that says it in this way. It was very interesting. It's the like all of these emotions, whether it's anger or sadness or depression, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's like taking out the trash. If you don't take out the trash, then your house is full of trash.
Yeah.
And eventually you can't fit anymore, just bust out the door.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very appropriate how to actually think about it in that way, because we have a hard time quantifying
Yeah.
our emotions.
Yeah.
If you think about it that way, like, oh well, that's another piece of trash that you you, you lugged around all around all
Yeah.
day long.
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah. And learning too, it's like the learning lesson there for me was like, there's a destructive way to express anger and there's a productive way to express anger,
Yeah.
And most of the time what we get exposed to when we're younger is the destructive. Like very few people know how to express anger in a productive way.
Mhm.
Right. So it's like scary, but what I had to learn, it was like, no, like you can express anger, like you can be upset, like you can be frustrated by things, and it's super healthy to do that, right? But then there's also this other side, that like prevents us from doing that, of thinking like, oh, I don't want to become like that person who like hurt me like when I was younger, or like yelled at that person, or like, like it's like that. But all emotions have like a productive side and then like an unproductive side, right? And so it's really important to learn that, right? But we can only learn that when we feel the frustration of not knowing it, and then we lean into it.
So how do you suggest someone productively, release, whether it's anger or frustration or anxiety?
Yeah. One of the best ways, I mean, you can do it on your own. You can also do it with somebody else, sometimes that's difficult when you're like first getting started, to like express it with somebody else, because you probably will be triggered by whatever's going on with that situation, right? So a really good one is to write it out, is to like listen for, okay, what part of me is so upset, right?
Mhm.
And like just journaling it out, like writing it out, and just like letting the anger out of like, what is it that you're so upset with? And like, what piece of you, right? That's like a really important thing to look at too, is like, what part of you, like, is it your like wounded inner child, or is it like your ego, like wanting to be right and making them wrong, or like, what is it, like what is going on in there? And so journaling is like a really great way to do it, because it won't create like destruction in your outer world. It'll just be contained in that space of your journaling prompt. And then you can start to get some insights of like, oh, like I'm so upset right now because like I did it my way and she did it her way, and like I think I'm right, but like like who's to say she's not right too, like maybe you just have different ways of doing things, right?
Journaling and writing down is definitely easier than putting yourself into a padded room or something. I don't even know where you can get a padded room. So awesome, super awesome. So tell us about your coaching and what kind of people you are looking for, and how do you conduct your coaching in general?
So the people I'm looking for are people who have been on a like kind of spiritual awakening journey already. A lot of times I'm not the first stop, like a lot of times they've started to look at if you're somebody who's like looking at your limiting beliefs, like looking at your reoccurring like thought patterns of like, I'm not good enough, and like all this kind of stuff, or your relationships, like you notice these like circular patterns that are just like so frustrating, but you can't quite break out of them. I work with a lot of people who are like already noticing these things. They already have started their awakening journey, and have read some books, and they're they're like trying to figure it out. Like they're like committed and like they're going to awaken, but I can help them move faster on that process.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. And how can people find you?
I'm actually redoing my whole like Instagram and TikTok accounts right now, but you can find me there at I am Dane Wright.
Okay, great. That's I am Dane Wright. Yeah.
I am Dane Wright. And my website is danewright.com.
Okay, that's Dane Wright, WRIGHT.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And thank you so much, Dane. As always, with our show, we always end with a quote that our guests are very inspired by, and you have yours ready here?
Yes. Oh wait, are you gonna read it or you want me to?
Yeah, I'm gonna have you read it.
Got it.
Here you go.
Okay, yeah. So this is one by Eckhart Tolle. You find peace not by rearranging the circumstances of your life, but by realizing who you are at the deepest level. Yeah, that one really sums up what I do. I help people realize who they are at the deepest level. Yeah, and in that they find inner peace.
Yeah, and there's a lot in there, because you have peace and you have how to rearrange and your own circumstances in your life, and then having the realization, and then who you are at the deepest level. So really, really amazing quote that we probably ponder on for a long time. Thank you so much, Dane. Really appreciate you. Really love your journey to where you are right now. I want to continue this, see how you continue to help others, as well as grow as a coach. Just very, very grateful to know you. And thank you for being on. And I think a lot of people get a lot out of this. And we'll say a little goodbye until next time.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure that you subscribe to receive notifications of all new episodes. And please give us a positive review. And if you want to hang out with us live, check out our YouTube channel, where you can continue the conversations with me and our guests.